The last rays of sunset painted the horizon in crimson and gold when the stagecoach lurched to a violent halt, dust billowing around the wooden wheels as masked men emerged from the shadows of the canyon walls. Josephine Whitfield clutched her reticule tighter against her chest, her heart hammering beneath her corset as the sound of gunshots pierced the evening air. This journey to Silver Creek was supposed to be her fresh start, not her final moment on this earth. It was 1878, and the territory of Arizona was still wild and untamed. Josephine had left behind a comfortable but empty life in Boston following the death of her father, hoping to find purpose as the new schoolteacher in the frontier town. Now, as rough voices demanded valuables and the other passengers trembled, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "Nobody move," a gruff voice called from outside the coach. "Hand over your valuables and nobody gets hurt." The elderly couple across from her shakily removed their wedding bands while the banker beside her reluctantly produced his pocket watch. When the masked bandit's eyes fell on Josephine, she felt her blood run cold. "That's a mighty fine necklace, miss," he said, gesturing to the silver pendant at her throat, her mother's last gift before consumption had taken her. "Please," Josephine whispered. "It's all I have of her." The bandit reached forward, but a sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. The robber's head snapped toward the sound, and Josephine caught a glimpse of a lone rider cresting the ridge, silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Boss, we've got company," one of the bandits shouted. The rider descended upon them like an avenging angel, his gun already drawn. His face was partially obscured by a bandana, but even from a distance, Josephine could see the determination in his stance. He fired a warning shot into the air. "I suggest you boys reconsider your evening plans," the newcomer called out, his voice steady and commanding. The leader of the bandits spat on the ground. "This ain't your business, stranger. I'm making it my business." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his revolver trained on the group of robbers. "Now step away from the coach." What followed was a blur of motion and gunfire. Josephine could only catch glimpses as passengers cowered and bandits scattered. The mysterious rider moved with practiced precision, disarming one robber with a well-placed shot to the shoulder, sending another scrambling when his hat was pierced clean through. When the shooting temporarily ceased, the rider approached the stagecoach door. Up close, Josephine could see his eyes steel blue and unwavering. He pulled down his bandana, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, yet handsome in its rugged way. "Name's Brody Xavier, madam," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Stay behind me until it's done." These boys aren't the type to retreat for long. True to his prediction, a shot rang out from behind a nearby boulder. Brody pushed Josephine back into the coach and positioned himself as a human shield. "Keep your head down," he commanded, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The ensuing firefight was brief but intense. When silence finally fell, 3 bandits lay wounded on the ground while the others had fled into the gathering darkness. Brody secured the injured men with rope from his saddlebag, his movements efficient and practiced. "You a lawman?" the driver asked, climbing down from his perch with trembling hands. "Used to be," Brody answered cryptically, tightening the last knot. "Now I just try to keep the roads safe when I can." He turned to the passengers who were cautiously emerging from the stagecoach. "Anyone hurt?" Josephine stepped forward, her legs unsteady. "Thanks to you, we're unharmed. How did you know to come?" A small smile crossed Brody's face, softening his stern features. "I didn't. Was tracking these fellas for 2 days after they hit another coach near Tucson. Just got lucky with the timing." The driver cleared his throat. We're still a good 3 hours from Silver Creek, and it'll be full dark soon. Not safe to continue tonight. There's a way station about a mile ahead, Brody said. We can escort the coach there, tend to these wounded, and continue at first light. As they prepared to depart, Josephine found herself studying the mysterious cowboy. There was something in his eyes that spoke of past sorrows, a depth that intrigued her. When he helped her back into the coach, their hands touched briefly, and a strange warmth spread through her fingers despite the evening chill. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm Josephine Whitfield. I'm to be the new schoolteacher in Silver Creek." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or simple interest. "Silver Creek, huh? Small world, Miss Whitfield. I've got business there myself." Before she could inquire further, he closed the door and mounted his horse, positioning himself alongside the coach as they proceeded carefully toward the way station. The way station was little more than a sturdy cabin with a large stable attached, but after their ordeal, it looked like a palace to Josephine. The caretaker, a grizzled old-timer named Hank, welcomed them with hot coffee and a roaring fire. While Brody secured the wounded bandits in the storeroom, the other passengers huddled near the warmth, their earlier terror giving way to exhausted relief. "Never seen shooting like that," the banker commented, sipping his coffee. "That man's a dead shot." "He saved our lives," Josephine agreed, her gaze drifting to the door where Brody had disappeared. The elderly woman patted Josephine's hand. "Be careful with those eyes of yours, dear. Men like him, they carry trouble wherever they go." Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "I was merely expressing gratitude." "Of course, dear," the woman replied with a knowing smile. When Brody returned, he accepted a cup of coffee but remained standing, his eyes constantly moving between the windows and doors. The vigilance of a man who had learned the hard way never to let his guard down. "Those fellas are the Slater gang," he explained to the group. "They've been terrorizing coaches across the territory for months. The sheriff in Silver Creek will be mighty pleased to see them brought in." "You know Sheriff Carter?" the driver asked. "We've crossed paths," Brody replied vaguely. "I'll ride ahead at first light to let him know we're coming with prisoners." As the evening wore on, the passengers gradually retired to the simple bedrolls Hank provided. Josephine, however, found sleep elusive. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind: the terror of the robbery, the unexpected rescue, the strange connection she'd felt to a man she'd just met. She rose quietly and stepped outside onto the small porch, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders against the desert night's chill. The stars overhead were brilliant, more numerous than she'd ever seen back east. "Couldn't sleep?" Brody's voice startled her. He was seated on a bench in the shadows, his revolver resting across his lap. "No," Josephine admitted, taking a tentative seat beside him. "Every time I close my eyes, I see those bandits." "That'll pass," he said gently. "First brush with danger always sits with you a while." "Is that why you're awake, standing guard?" He gave a small shrug. "Old habits. Besides, those Slater boys have friends. Better safe than sorry." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the occasional whinny from the horses in the stable. "May I ask you something, Mr. Xavier?" "Brody," he corrected. "And sure. You said you used to be a lawman. What happened?" His posture stiffened slightly. "That's a long story, Miss Whitfield." "Josephine," she countered with a small smile, "and we seem to have time." Brody gazed out into the darkness for so long that Josephine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "I was a deputy marshal based in Santa Fe. 5 years of tracking the worst kind of men through every hellhole in the territory." He paused, running a thumb along the edge of his gun. Last year, my partner and I were ambushed while bringing in a notorious killer. Tom didn't make it. I took 3 bullets and barely survived. I'm so sorry, Josephine whispered. When I recovered, I turned in my badge. Couldn't stomach the politics anymore. The killer we'd captured walked free because a judge was paid off. His jaw tightened. So now I do things my own way. Track the worst offenders, bring them to justice however I can. A bounty hunter. Sometimes, he admitted. Other times I just intervene, like today. Josephine studied his profile in the moonlight. That sounds like a lonely life. It is what it is. He turned to look at her directly. What about you? What brings a refined Eastern lady to a rough place like Silver Creek? She smiled wistfully. Is it that obvious I'm from back east? Your accent, the way you hold yourself, the fact that you're wearing gloves that have never seen a day of hard labor. His observation wasn't judgmental, merely matter of fact. My father was a professor in Boston. When he passed last winter, I found myself alone with few prospects. I've always wanted to teach, and when I saw the advertisement for a schoolteacher in Silver Creek, it seemed like fate. She twisted her hands in her lap. Though after today, I'm wondering if fate has a cruel sense of humor. Silver Creek's not so bad, Brody said. Good people mostly, just need someone to help civilize the next generation. And what business brings you there? She asked, remembering his earlier comment. A shadow crossed his face. Looking for someone, a man who needs to answer for his crimes. Before she could press further, a sound from the brush beside the cabin caught their attention. Brody was on his feet in an instant, pushing Josephine behind him as he raised his weapon. Get inside, he whispered urgently. Now. What is it? She asked, her heart racing anew. Just do as I say. Stay behind me until it's done. The words echoed from earlier that day, sending a chill down her spine. She retreated to the doorway but couldn't bring herself to go inside, watching as Brody approached the brush with cautious steps. A twig snapped in the darkness and Brody fired a warning shot that split the night. Show yourself, he commanded. There was a moment of tense silence, then a young voice called out, Don't shoot, please. From the bushes emerged a boy no more than 15, hands raised in surrender, his dirty face streaked with tears. Jacob. Brody lowered his gun in surprise. What in blazes are you doing out here? The boy rushed forward, words tumbling out in a panic stream. They got Pa, Mr. Xavier. Those men you're after, they took him when they found out you'd captured their friends. Brody's face hardened. Who has your father, Jacob? Slow down and tell me clearly. The rest of the Slater gang, the boy said, gulping for air. They came to our ranch after sundown. Said if you don't release their men by noon tomorrow, they'll kill Pa. Said to tell you to bring the prisoners to Copper Canyon. Josephine watched the conflict play across Brody's face, duty warring with compassion. How many men? He asked. 5, maybe 6, Jacob replied. They're holed up in the old mining camp. Brody placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You did right coming to me, Jacob. Now get inside and get some food in you. We'll figure this out. As Jacob went inside with Hank, Brody turned to find Josephine still standing in the doorway, her face pale in the moonlight. I can't release those men, he said quietly. They've killed innocent people, but I can't let them murder Jacob's father either. What will you do? She asked. A grim determination settled over his features. What I always do, find a way to beat them at their own game. He looked up at the star-filled sky, calculating. We have about 8 hours until dawn. That should be enough time. Enough time for what? To set a trap of our own. He met her gaze directly. Miss Whitfield, Josephine, I know we've only just met, but I could use your help. Despite every sensible instinct telling her to stay safely inside, Josephine found herself nodding. Tell me what to do. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Brody outlined his plan to the way station keeper, the stagecoach driver, and Jacob, each assigned specific roles. Josephine watched in admiration as he transformed from a lone vigilante into a strategic commander, his mind working through every contingency. Her own role was simple but crucial. She would pose as a nurse tending to the wounded Slater gang members. When the exchange was made, she would create a distraction that would allow Brody and the others to gain the upper hand. "I don't like putting you in danger," Brody told her as they prepared, loading extra ammunition into his gun belt. "But you're the only one they won't immediately suspect." "I want to help," she insisted. "That boy needs his father." Brody studied her for a moment, a new respect in his eyes. "You're not what I expected, Josephine Whitfield." "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied with a small smile. It was meant as one. As dawn broke over the desert landscape, they set their plan in motion. The stagecoach, now carrying the bound Slater gang members, their wounds treated and bandaged by Josephine, began the journey to Copper Canyon. Brody rode ahead, seemingly alone, while Jacob and Hank took a hidden route to outflank the remaining gang members. Josephine sat inside the coach, her heart pounding as they approached the meeting point. She wore Hank's late wife's dress, modified to look like a frontier nurse's garb, and carried a small medical bag containing more than just bandages. A Derringer pistol was hidden at the bottom, loaded and ready. "Remember," the driver murmured as they neared the canyon, "when Mr. Xavier gives the signal, get down fast and stay down." She nodded, clutching the bag tightly. Through the window, she could see Brody up ahead, a solitary figure against the rugged terrain. Even from a distance, his confidence was palpable, his posture betraying no fear despite riding into what could easily become an ambush. Copper Canyon lived up to its name, its walls glinting with mineral deposits that caught the morning sun. As they rounded a bend, Josephine saw them 5 men on horseback, with a 6th figure slumped over a saddle, hands tied behind his back. Jacob's father. Brody halted his horse about 50 yards from the gang, raising one hand in greeting. "I brought what you asked for," he called out, his voice carrying in the canyon's natural acoustics. The leader of the remaining gang, a burly man with a thick beard, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Let's see him, Xavier." At Brody's signal, the stagecoach moved forward until it was beside him. The driver pulled back the canvas covering, revealing the 3 wounded gang members inside with Josephine. "They need medical attention," Brody said. "That's why the nurse is with them. Now let Cartwright go." The leader laughed. "You think we're stupid? Send the woman and our boys over first." Josephine could see Brody's jaw tighten. This wasn't part of the plan, but he nodded slightly to her. She understood they needed to adapt. "Help them down," he instructed her, loud enough for the gang to hear. With shaking hands that weren't entirely an act, Josephine helped the first bandit out of the coach. He was the most severely wounded, with a bandaged shoulder that limited his movement. As they approached the halfway point between the 2 groups, she whispered to him, "If you make any sudden moves, Mr. Xavier will put a bullet in you before you take 2 steps." The bandit glanced at Brody's unwavering gun and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The exchange continued with the second bandit, and then the third. Each time, Josephine returned to the stagecoach alone, her anxiety building. The gang still hadn't released Jacob's father. "You've got your men," Brody called out after the third exchange. "Now it's your turn." The leader gestured, and one of his men roughly hauled Jacob's father off the horse. The poor man could barely stand, his face bruised and bloodied from what had clearly been a severe beating. "Walk," the gang member ordered, shoving him forward. As Mr. Cartwright stumbled toward them, Josephine prepared herself. The moment he crossed paths with her would be the signal. She would drop to the ground and Brody would take his shot at the leader. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, Josephine could only recall fragments. Mr. Cartwright reached her, his eyes filled with gratitude. She smiled encouragingly at him, then let her medical bag fall to the ground as planned. But one of the bandits, the one with the wounded shoulder, suddenly lunged forward, grabbing her around the waist and pressing a hidden knife to her throat. "Nobody move," he shouted. "Or the lady gets it." Brody froze, his gun half raised. The leader of the gang laughed triumphantly. "Looks like we win after all, Xavier," he called. "Drop your weapon." Time seemed to slow as Josephine met Brody's gaze across the distance. In his eyes, she saw something that steadied her racing heart, not fear or defeat, but absolute resolve. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod. Understanding flashed between them. Josephine suddenly went limp, as if fainting, her dead weight surprising the bandit. As his grip loosened, she drove her elbow into his wounded shoulder with all her strength. The man howled in pain, and in that instant, Brody fired. The leader of the gang toppled from his horse as shots erupted from the canyon rim. Hank and Jacob, right on schedule. Chaos ensued as the remaining gang members returned fire. Josephine scrambled away from her captor, retrieving the derringer from her fallen bag. When the bandit lunged toward her again, she aimed and fired, catching him in the leg. He fell with a shriek of pain just as Brody reached her side, pulling her behind the relative safety of a large boulder. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes frantically scanning her for injuries. "No," she gasped. "I'm fine." Relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by determination. "Stay here, don't move." The firefight lasted mere minutes but felt like hours to Josephine. When silence finally fell, she peered cautiously around the boulder to see Brody standing amidst the defeated gang, his gun still drawn as he checked each man. 2 were dead, including the leader. The others were wounded but alive, groaning in pain as Hank and the stagecoach driver secured them with rope. Jacob had rushed to his father's side, helping the battered man sit up against a rock. Seeing they were safe, Josephine emerged from her hiding place, medical bag in hand. "Let me help," she said, kneeling beside Mr. Cartwright to assess his injuries. As she worked, cleaning cuts and bandaging wounds, she was aware of Brody watching her. When she glanced up, the admiration in his eyes made her breath catch. "You're something else, Miss Whitfield," he said quietly. "Not many schoolteachers I know would keep their head in a situation like that." "I surprised myself," she admitted, securing a bandage around Mr. Cartwright's ribs. "But I couldn't let that boy lose his father." Mr. Cartwright grasped her hand weakly. "Thank you, miss. You and Mr. Xavier saved my life. We'll get you back to the way station to rest," Brody said. "Then continue on to Silver Creek tomorrow. Sheriff Carter will want statements from everyone." As they prepared to leave, loading the dead gang members onto their horses and the wounded into the stagecoach, Brody approached Josephine again. "That was quick thinking back there," he said. "The way you handled yourself." "Just following your lead," she replied modestly. He shook his head. "No, that was all you. You're braver than you give yourself credit for." Before she could respond, he was called away to help secure the prisoners. But something had changed between them, a bond forged in danger that went beyond mere gratitude or admiration. The journey back to the way station was somber but relieved. Jacob rode with his father in the coach, while Brody once again took position as outrider. Occasionally, Josephine would catch his eye through the window, and a silent understanding would pass between them. By the time they reached the way station, the sun was high overhead. Hank's wife, Martha, had prepared a hearty meal for everyone, and the atmosphere gradually lightened as the danger receded and hunger took precedence. Josephine found herself seated beside Brody at the rough-hewn table, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they ate. Each casual contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, a feeling entirely new and somewhat alarming in its intensity. "So," she said, keeping her voice light, "will you continue to Silver Creek with us tomorrow?" "I have to," he replied, "to deliver these prisoners and give my report to Sheriff Carter." "And after that, will you be moving on to track down more outlaws?" Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, for he turned to look at her directly. "Are you asking if I'm staying in Silver Creek, Josephine?" Her cheeks warmed. "I suppose I am, yes." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I haven't decided yet. Might depend on what I find there that's worth staying for." Their eyes held for a moment longer than was proper, and Josephine felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear or danger. "Silver Creek needs good people," she said finally. "People who stand up for what's right." "Is that what you think I am? A good man?" The question was asked lightly, but she sensed a genuine uncertainty beneath it. "I think you're a man who's seen too much darkness and still chooses to fight it. That makes you a very good man in my estimation." He looked down at his plate, seemingly at a loss for words. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher than before. "Your estimation means more than it should, considering we met less than a day ago." "Sometimes," she said softly, "a day can change everything." Later that evening, as the way station settled into quiet, Josephine once again found herself unable to sleep. This time, however, it wasn't fear keeping her awake, but a restless energy she couldn't quite name. She stepped outside onto the porch, unsurprised to find Brody already there. He stood leaning against a post, looking out at the star-scattered sky. "We should stop meeting like this," he said without turning, a smile in his voice. "People will talk." "Let them," she replied, coming to stand beside him. "After today, I find I care less about what people think." He chuckled. "Frontier life will do that to you." They stood in companionable silence for a while, the desert night spreading around them, vast and peaceful after the day's violence. "Can I ask you something?" she ventured eventually. "Anything." "The man you're looking for in Silver Creek, is he dangerous?" Brody was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. "Yes, he's the one who orchestrated the ambush that killed my partner. Judge Harmon let him walk on a technicality, but I've been tracking him for months. Finally got word he's in Silver Creek, possibly planning something big. What will you do when you find him?" "What I should have done a year ago. Bring him to justice." His hand unconsciously moved to his side, where Josephine knew bandages still covered old wounds. "One way or another." She touched his arm gently. "Just be careful, I'd like the chance to know you better, Brody Xavier." He turned to her then, his expression softening in the moonlight. "I'd like that too, Josephine Whitfield. More than I should." His hand found hers, calloused fingers entwining with her softer ones. The simple contact sent a current through her that made her previous infatuation seem pale and insignificant by comparison. "We should try to get some sleep," he said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "Yes," she agreed, though neither made any move to release the other's hand. "Brody, thank you, not just for saving my life, but for showing me I'm stronger than I thought." He smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his rugged features. "You always were strong, Josephine. You just needed the chance to prove it to yourself." With that, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture, so courtly and unexpected from this hardened frontiersman, left her breathless. "Good night," he whispered, releasing her hand and stepping back. "Good night," she echoed, reluctantly turning toward the door. As she settled onto her bedroll, Josephine knew that whatever happened in Silver Creek, her life had irrevocably changed. She had come west seeking purpose and had found not only that, but possibly something even more precious, a connection to a man unlike any she had ever known. Dawn came too quickly, bringing with it the bustle of preparation for the final leg of their journey to Silver Creek. The wounded were loaded carefully into the stagecoach, while Jacob and his father rode alongside on horses borrowed from Hank. As they prepared to depart, Brody pulled Josephine aside. "I'll be riding ahead with the prisoners," he explained. "Need to alert the sheriff before we arrive. I want you to stay with the coach. It should be safe now, but you worry," she finished for him, smiling. "I understand. We'll be right behind you." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded and mounted his horse. With the wounded bandits secured to their own mounts, he led the small procession away from the way station, casting one final glance back at Josephine before disappearing around a bend. The remaining journey passed uneventfully, the landscape gradually changing from open desert to rolling hills, dotted with pine trees, as they approached Silver Creek. By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill to see the town spread before them, larger than Josephine had expected, with several streets of wooden buildings, a church steeple rising prominently at one end. "There she is," the driver announced. "Silver Creek, population 300 and growing." Josephine's stomach fluttered with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. This would be her home now, these people her neighbors and the children her pupils. Somewhere in that town, Brody was already making arrangements for the prisoners. Would he stay once his business was concluded? The uncertainty made her heart ache strangely. As the stagecoach rolled down the main street, Josephine noted curious faces peering from shop windows and doorways. News traveled fast in small towns. No doubt everyone already knew about the stagecoach robbery and subsequent events. They pulled up before a sturdy building with a sign proclaiming it the sheriff's office. Almost immediately the door opened, and a tall man with a star pinned to his vest emerged, followed by Brody. "Miss Whitfield," Brody said, helping her down from the coach. "This is Sheriff Thomas Carter." "Madam," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Mr. Xavier here has been telling me about your ordeal. Sounds like you showed considerable courage." "It was Mr. Xavier who saved us all," she demurred. "Well, from what I hear, it was a joint effort," Sheriff Carter said with a knowing look between them. "In any case, the town council will want to thank you both properly. But first, I imagine you'll want to get settled. Mrs. Peterson has your boarding house room all ready." A plump, motherly woman stepped forward from the small crowd that had gathered. "I'm Ellen Peterson, dear. The school board hired me to make arrangements for you. Your trunk arrived yesterday on the freight wagon." Josephine smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I'm eager to see my accommodations and the schoolhouse." "Of course, dear. But first, you look like you could use a hot bath and a decent meal after what you've been through." As arrangements were made to escort Josephine to her new home, she found a moment alone with Brody. "Will I see you again?" she asked quietly, his eyes softened. "Count on it. I need to help the sheriff process these prisoners and give my official statement, but after that, perhaps I could call on you, properly, I mean." Joy bloomed in her chest. "I'd like that very much." He squeezed her hand briefly. "Get some rest, Josephine. You've earned it." With that, they parted ways, Josephine following Mrs. Peterson toward the boarding house while Brody returned to the sheriff's office. As she walked down the wooden sidewalk, Josephine felt the curious gazes of her new neighbors, but found she didn't mind. Let them look. Let them wonder about the new schoolteacher who had helped capture the notorious Slater gang on her very journey to town. For the first time since leaving Boston, Josephine felt truly alive. The boarding house was a tidy two-story building on a quiet side street, its front yard boasting a well-tended garden that reminded Josephine of home. Mrs. Peterson showed her to a comfortable room on the second floor, complete with a small writing desk, a narrow bed with a colorful quilt, and a washstand with a porcelain basin. "It's lovely," Josephine said sincerely. "The bathroom's at the end of the hall. I've already had hot water brought up for you," Mrs. Peterson said. "Dinner's at 6, but I can bring a tray up if you're too tired for company tonight." "That's very kind, but I think I'd like to meet the other boarders," Josephine replied. "After all, this is my home now." After Mrs. Peterson left, Josephine sank onto the bed, the events of the past 2 days finally catching up with her. She had survived a stagecoach robbery, helped capture dangerous outlaws, and even fired a gun in self-defense, all things the prim Boston schoolteacher she'd been would have found unthinkable. And then there was Brody Xavier. The memory of his hand holding hers, his lips brushing her knuckles, sent a pleasant shiver through her. He was unlike any man she'd ever known, dangerous yet honorable, hard yet capable of surprising gentleness. The prospect of seeing him again made her heart race in a most improper manner. After a long, blissful soak in the bathtub, Josephine changed into one of her simpler dresses and ventured downstairs. The boarding house dining room was already occupied by several people who looked up with undisguised interest as she entered. "Everyone," Mrs. Peterson announced. "This is Miss Josephine Whitfield, our new schoolteacher." A chorus of greetings followed, and Josephine was quickly introduced to the other boarders: Mr. Jenkins, the telegraph operator; Miss Abigail Hanson, who ran the millinery shop; Dr. Raymond Parker, the town physician; and the widow Collins, who taught piano to the town's children. "We've heard all about your adventure, Miss Whitfield," Miss Hanson said eagerly as they ate. "Is it true you shot one of the Slater gang?" Josephine blushed. "I'm afraid the stories have been exaggerated. I merely defended myself when necessary." "And that cowboy who rescued you," Widow Collins added with a knowing smile, "Mr. Xavier, they say he's quite handsome in a dangerous sort of way." "He was very brave," Josephine acknowledged, hoping her cheeks weren't as red as they felt. "Without his intervention, I fear none of us would have reached Silver Creek alive." Dr. Parker leaned forward. "I treated his wounds last year, you know. 3 bullet wounds that would have killed a lesser man. Never complained once during the whole painful process. Just kept asking when he could ride again." "You know him well, then?" Josephine asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "As well as anyone knows Brody Xavier," the doctor replied with a shrug. "He keeps to himself mostly. Stays at the hotel when he's in town, which isn't often. Been hunting bounties since he left the marshals." "He's a good man," Mr. Jenkins interjected. "Sends most of his bounty money to his sister in Colorado. Widowed with 3 young ones. Not many know that." Josephine absorbed this information, filing it away with what little she already knew about Brody. A man of hidden depths, it seemed. After dinner, despite her fatigue, Josephine found herself standing by her window, looking out at the town that was to be her new home. Silver Creek was settling into evening, routine lamps being lit in windows, the saloon down the street coming alive with piano music and laughter, a few people still making their way along the boardwalks. Her gaze was drawn to movement on the street below, a familiar figure walking purposefully toward the boarding house. Brody. Her heart leaped, then settled into a rapid rhythm as she watched him hesitate at the gate, adjust his hat, then stride up to the door. A moment later, she heard Mrs. Peterson's voice from downstairs, followed by footsteps on the stairs. A gentle knock sounded on her door. "Miss Whitfield, you have a visitor. Mr. Xavier is in the parlor." Josephine took a deep breath, checking her appearance quickly in the small mirror above the washstand. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I'll be right down." The parlor was a cozy room at the front of the house, furnished with several comfortable chairs and a small sofa. Brody stood when she entered, removing his hat in a smooth motion. He'd clearly taken time to clean up as well. His hair was damp, his face freshly shaved, and he wore a clean shirt under his leather vest. "Miss Whitfield," he said formally, aware of Mrs. Peterson hovering nearby. "I hope I'm not disturbing your evening." "Not at all, Mr. Xavier," she replied, matching his tone. "It's good to see you." Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat. "I'll bring some coffee," she said, though her expression made it clear she was leaving the door open for propriety's sake. Once they were relatively alone, Brody's posture relaxed slightly. "You look well," he said softly. "The town suits you already." "Everyone has been very kind," she acknowledged. "How are the prisoners, secure in the jail?" Sheriff Carter sent telegrams to the territorial marshal and the other towns where the Slater gang operated. "There'll be a trial in a few weeks." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I've been asked to stay until then, to testify." Josephine couldn't hide her smile. "Then you'll be in Silver Creek for a while." "It appears so." His eyes held hers. "I was hoping. That is, if you're not too busy with your new position. Perhaps I could show you around town tomorrow. There's a nice cafe that serves a decent breakfast." "I would like that very much, Mrs. Peterson returned with coffee and a plate of cookies, effectively ending their private conversation. For the next half hour, they spoke of neutral topics: the weather, the upcoming town social, the new schoolhouse where Josephine would begin teaching the following week. When Brody finally rose to leave, Josephine walked him to the door. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, his voice low enough that Mrs. Peterson, busying herself with the coffee cups, couldn't hear. "I look forward to it," Josephine replied. He hesitated, then reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze before releasing it and stepping outside. Josephine watched him walk away, a curious lightness in her chest despite the day's fatigue. "He's quite taken with you," Mrs. Peterson observed, suddenly at her elbow. Josephine jumped slightly. "Oh, I don't know about that. We've only just met, after all." The older woman smiled knowingly. "My dear, I've been watching young people fall in love for 30 years. I know the signs." "Love, that's absurd," Josephine protested, though her heart raced at the word. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes it happens that way," Mrs. Peterson said with a shrug. "My Henry proposed after knowing me 3 days. We had 42 wonderful years together before the good Lord called him home." With that, she patted Josephine's arm and bustled away, leaving the young woman to ponder her words. That night, Josephine dreamed of stagecoaches and gunfire, of danger and rescue. But mostly, she dreamed of steel blue eyes and a gentle hand holding hers beneath the desert stars. Morning brought sunshine streaming through her window and a renewed sense of anticipation. Josephine dressed with extra care, selecting a pale blue dress that she knew complemented her eyes, and arranging her hair in a style that was neat but not severe. Brody was waiting on the boarding house porch when she came downstairs, his hat in his hands, looking surprisingly nervous for a man who had faced down armed bandits without flinching. "Good morning," she greeted him, pleased when his eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of her. "Morning," he replied, offering his arm. "Shall we?" They walked through Silver Creek, Brody pointing out various establishments and introducing her to people they encountered. The town was fully awake now, bustling with morning activities: shopkeepers sweeping their porches, children running errands, wagons delivering goods. "And there's your domain," Brody said, indicating a white clapboard building at the end of a side street. "The Silver Creek School." Josephine's heart quickened at the sight. It was smaller than the schools she'd known in Boston, but it was charming, with large windows and a bell tower on top. "Would you like to see inside?" he asked, producing a key from his pocket. "Sheriff Carter lent me this. Thought you might want a preview before the official tour with the school board tomorrow." "You thought of everything," she said, genuinely touched by his consideration. The schoolhouse was simple but well-maintained, with 2 rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk and blackboard. A small stove stood in one corner for the winter months, and bookshelves lined the back wall, though they were sparsely filled. "We'll need more books," Josephine murmured, already making mental notes. "The town will support you," Brody assured her. "Education's important out here. Most of these kids won't have many opportunities otherwise." She turned to look at him, standing there in the morning light streaming through the windows. "You care about these children." "I care about building something better than what we have," he said simply. "That starts with teaching the next generation properly." In that moment, Josephine could easily imagine a future here teaching these frontier children, building a life in this growing town, perhaps even with this complex, honorable man beside her. The thought both thrilled and frightened her with its intensity. "Breakfast," he suggested, seeming to sense her emotional turmoil. "You must be hungry." The cafe was just opening when they arrived, and they were seated at a small table by the window. Over plates of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits, their conversation flowed easily, moving from their immediate surroundings to deeper topics: books they'd read, places they'd seen, hopes they harbored. "You never mention your family," Josephine said as they lingered over coffee. "Do you have siblings besides your sister in Colorado?" A shadow crossed his face. "Had a brother. He died at Shiloh. I was just a kid then, but I remember how it changed our parents. Father was never the same." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "The war took so much from so many. Your family." "My mother died when I was 12. Consumption. Father raised me alone after that, surrounded me with books and ideas. He was a good man." She smiled sadly. "I miss him terribly still." Brody reached across the table, briefly covering her hand with his. "He'd be proud of you. Coming all this way, facing danger, ready to shape young minds." "I hope so," she whispered. After breakfast, they continued their tour of the town, ending at the livery stable where Brody kept his horse. "I need to check on Duster," he explained. "Make sure he's recovered from our adventures." The big bay gelding nickered in recognition as they approached his stall. Brody produced an apple from his pocket, which the horse accepted with obvious delight. "He likes you," Josephine observed, smiling at the gentle interaction between man and beast. "We've been through a lot together," Brody said, patting the horse's neck affectionately. 5 years, countless miles. He's never let me down." "May I?" she asked, reaching a tentative hand toward the horse. "Of course. He's gentle with ladies." Josephine stroked the horse's velvety nose, charmed when he pushed against her hand for more attention. "He's beautiful." "Would you like to ride him sometime?" Brody asked. "When you're settled in, I could take you out to see some of the countryside around Silver Creek. There's a waterfall about an hour's ride that's worth seeing." The invitation and the promise of future outings together warmed her. "I'd like that, though I should warn you, I'm not an accomplished rider." "Duster will take care of you," he promised, "and so will I." Their eyes met over the stall door, and something electric passed between them. Josephine felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gaze. The moment was broken by the arrival of the stable boy, coming to refill the water troughs. Brody stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should let you get back. You must have preparations to make for your teaching duties." "Yes," she agreed, though reluctantly. "The school board is meeting me tomorrow to discuss the curriculum." As they walked back toward the boarding house, their hands occasionally brushed, sending little jolts of awareness through Josephine. At her door, Brody paused. "Thank you for a lovely morning, Miss Whitfield." "Josephine," she reminded him softly. "After all we've been through, I think we're past formalities, don't you?" A smile touched his lips. "Josephine, then, and I'm just Brody. No Mr. needed." "Brody," she echoed, liking the feel of his name without adornment. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "Count on it," he promised. "Perhaps dinner. There's a restaurant at the hotel that serves a decent steak." "I'd like that." He hesitated, then raised her hand to his lips as he had that night at the way station. This time, however, his kiss lingered a moment longer, his eyes holding hers over their joined hands. "Until tomorrow, Josephine," he murmured, before reluctantly releasing her and walking away. Josephine watched him go, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. She had come to Silver Creek seeking a fresh start, a purpose beyond the narrow confines of Boston society. Instead, she had found adventure, danger, and possibly, though it seemed impossible after just 2 days, the beginnings of love. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Josephine settled into her new life. The school term began with 28 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, all eager to meet their new teacher from the East. The days quickly developed a pleasant rhythm: mornings teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic to her charges, afternoons spent preparing lessons and grading papers, and then there were the evenings with Brody. True to his word, he remained in Silver Creek, awaiting the trial of the Slater gang. In the meantime, he had taken on the role of deputy sheriff, helping Thomas Carter maintain order in the growing town. The position suited him. Josephine thought, allowing him to use his skills for justice without the constant danger and solitude of bounty hunting. Their courtship, for that was what it had become. Despite neither of them officially naming it, such progressed with a sweetness that surprised them both. Dinners at the hotel restaurant, walks along Silver Creek itself in the golden evening light, Sunday afternoon rides into the surrounding countryside aboard the Patient Duster. During one such ride, they stopped to rest in a meadow dotted with wildflowers. Josephine sat on a fallen log while Brody tended to his horse, watching him with undisguised admiration. "You're staring," he noted with amusement, glancing over his shoulder at her. "Am I?" she replied innocently. "I was just thinking about how different my life would have been if that stagecoach hadn't been robbed." He secured Duster's reins to a nearby branch and came to sit beside her on the log. "Different how?" "Well, I wouldn't have met you, for one thing." She smiled up at him. "At least, not in such dramatic circumstances." "Oh, I don't know about that," he mused, his arm settling comfortably around her shoulders. "Silver Creek's not that big. We would have crossed paths eventually." "Perhaps, but would you have noticed me? The prim schoolteacher fresh from Boston." His expression grew serious. "Josephine, I would have noticed you if you were standing in a crowd of 100 women. There's something about you that—" He paused, searching for words. "That calls to me. From the first moment I saw you in that stagecoach, frightened but still holding your ground." The sincerity in his voice made her heart swell. On impulse, she leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "I'm glad it happened the way it did then, though perhaps with a bit less danger next time," he chuckled, turning to face her fully. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her skin. "May I?" he whispered. She nodded, unable to find her voice as he leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When his lips finally met hers, Josephine felt as though the world around them had disappeared. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, then deepened with a hunger that matched her own awakening desire. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. Brody rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed as if savoring the moment. "I've wanted to do that since the way station," he admitted. "I've wanted you to," she confessed, her hands still resting on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. They returned to town later than planned, both wearing expressions that probably revealed more than was proper about their afternoon activities. If Mrs. Peterson noticed Josephine's flushed cheeks and slightly disheveled hair at dinner that evening, she was kind enough not to comment. The days continued to pass pleasantly, punctuated by stolen moments together, kisses in the shadow of the schoolhouse after the children had gone home, hands clasped beneath the table during community suppers, quiet conversations on the boarding house porch long after propriety dictated Brody should have left. Then came the day of the trial. The territorial judge arrived on the morning stage, and the town hall was quickly transformed into a makeshift courtroom. The remaining members of the Slater gang were brought in under heavy guard, their expressions sullen as they faced justice at last. Brody testified first, his account of tracking the gang and the subsequent events at the Stagecoach and Copper Canyon delivered with professional detachment. Josephine followed, more nervous but equally clear in her testimony. When asked about her role in capturing the outlaws, she downplayed her actions, attributing their success entirely to Brody's bravery and quick thinking. His eyes, watching her from his seat near the sheriff, told her he knew better. The trial lasted just 2 days, the evidence against the gang overwhelming. When the judge delivered his verdict guilty on all counts, with sentences ranging from 20 years to hanging for the worst offenders, a collective sigh of relief went through the town. The Slater gang had terrorized the region for too long. Their capture and conviction represented a significant victory for law and order in the territory. That evening, the town held an impromptu celebration at the hotel. Music, food, and drink flowed freely, as the citizens of Silver Creek rejoiced in their newfound security. Josephine, wearing her best dress, a deep green silk that had seemed impractically fine for frontier life, until this moment found herself the center of much attention, the story of her courage during the robbery having grown with each retelling. "You'd think I single-handedly captured the entire gang," she murmured to Brody as they shared a quiet moment near the punch bowl. "Let them have their hero," he replied with a fond smile. "This town needs someone to look up to, and you fit the bill perfectly." "I believe that's your role," she countered. "Deputy Xavier, protector of Silver Creek." A shadow crossed his face there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "About that," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "Could we step outside for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." Concern fluttered in her chest as she followed him onto the hotel's side veranda, away from the noise and crowds. The night was cool, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. "What is it?" she asked when he remained silent, staring out at the darkening town. Brody turned to face her, his expression troubled. "The trial's over. The men I was tracking are headed to prison or the gallows." "Yes," she agreed cautiously. "Isn't that good news?" "It is, but it also means—" He took a deep breath. "It means the reason I gave for staying in Silver Creek no longer applies." Josephine felt as though the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted. "Are you saying you're leaving?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No, that's not." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm saying I need a reason to stay, a real one, not just an excuse." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by confusion. "I don't understand." Brody stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. "Josephine, these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. For years, I've been wandering, hunting men who deserve justice, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. It was easier that way after what happened with my partner. Easier not to care too much." He squeezed her hands gently. "But then you came along, and suddenly I find myself caring very much. About this town, about the future, about you." Josephine's heart began to race as she realized where this conversation was heading. "Brody, I know it's fast," he continued quickly. "Too fast, probably. We've known each other barely a month. But I also know what I feel, and I think I hope you might feel the same." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the lantern light. A ring, simple but beautiful, with a modest diamond flanked by two smaller sapphires. "This was my mother's," he explained softly. "I've carried it with me for years, never thinking I'd have a reason to offer it to anyone." Josephine gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth as he slowly dropped to one knee before her. "Josephine Whitfield, I know I'm not the kind of man your father might have chosen for you. I'm rough around the edges with a past that's not always pretty. But I promise you this, I will spend every day trying to be the man you deserve. If you'll have me as your husband, I'll never leave your side again." Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision of this strong, brave man kneeling before her, offering his heart as openly as he had once offered his protection. "Stay behind me until it's done," he had said that first day. But what he was offering now was a lifetime of standing beside her, facing whatever came together. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Brody Xavier, I will marry you." Joy blazed across his face as he rose, slipping the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. Then he was pulling her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotions words couldn't express: love, gratitude, promise. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Brody pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Josephine. Have since that night at the way station, I think." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling natural and right. "Though I believe it started for me when you said stay behind me until it's done. Never had anyone protect me that way before." He chuckled, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "Well, get used to it, because I plan to keep you safe for the rest of our lives." A throat cleared behind them, and they turned to find Sheriff Carter standing in the doorway, a knowing smile on his face. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, not looking sorry at all, "but folks are asking for the guests of honor." "We'll be right in, Thomas," Brody replied, his arm secure around Josephine's waist. "Should I be offering congratulations?" The sheriff asked, his gaze dropping to the ring now adorning Josephine's left hand. Brody looked to Josephine, who nodded happily. "Yes," he confirmed. "Miss Whitfield has agreed to become Mrs. Xavier." "About time," Sheriff Carter said with a grin. "Whole town's been taking bets on when you'd get around to asking her. I believe Doc Parker just won a considerable sum." As the sheriff returned inside, presumably to announce their engagement to the assembled townspeople, Brody turned back to Josephine. "Are you ready for this? Once we go in there, the whole town will know." "I'm ready," she assured him, reaching up to straighten his collar affectionately. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Hand in hand, they re-entered the hotel to a chorus of cheers and well wishes. Mrs. Peterson was openly weeping, while Dr. Parker collected his winnings with a satisfied grin. Even the mayor stepped forward to shake Brody's hand and kiss Josephine's cheek, declaring their engagement a fitting conclusion to the day's events. As the celebration continued around them, now with a second reason for rejoicing, Josephine found herself surrounded by the women of Silver Creek, all eager to discuss wedding plans. June was the traditional month for brides. Mrs. Peterson insisted, though Miss Hanson argued that a spring wedding would be equally lovely. "What do you think, my dear?" the widow Collins asked Josephine. "When would you like the ceremony to be?" Josephine glanced across the room to where Brody stood with the sheriff and other men, his gaze frequently seeking hers as if to reassure himself she was still there, still his. "Soon," she said decisively. "I don't need an elaborate ceremony, just him and all of you, our new friends and family." The women exchanged approving looks. "That settles it," Mrs. Peterson declared. 3 weeks from Sunday. That gives us just enough time to prepare a proper celebration without unnecessary delay." Later that night, as Brody walked Josephine back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars, they spoke of their future together. The small house at the edge of town that was for sale, where they could start their life together. The possibility of children someday. His permanent appointment as deputy sheriff, and her continued teaching for Josephine had no intention of giving up her beloved classroom even after marriage. "Are you sure about that?" Brody asked as they paused at the boarding house gate. "Most men expect their wives to stay home." "Are you most men?" she challenged gently. He laughed, pulling her close. "No, I suppose not, and you are definitely not most women." "Then we're agreed. I'll continue teaching, at least until we have children." "Agreed," he murmured, sealing the promise with a kiss that lingered until Mrs. Peterson pointedly turned the porch light on and off. "I should go in," Josephine sighed reluctantly. 3 weeks, Brody reminded her. "Then you'll never have to say good night to me again." The thought sent a pleasant shiver through her. 3 weeks, she echoed. "It seems both an eternity and no time at all to prepare for a wedding." "All I need is you," he said simply. "The rest is just details." With a final kiss, she slipped inside, her heart too full for words. From the stagecoach robbery that had thrown them together to this moment of perfect happiness, it had been a journey neither could have predicted, but both now treasured. The 3 weeks before their wedding passed in a flurry of preparations and anticipation. The women of Silver Creek rallied around Josephine, helping to sew her wedding dress, prepare the church, and plan the celebration that would follow the ceremony. Meanwhile, Brody and some of the town's men worked on renovating the small house that would become their home, adding a new porch and repainting the exterior. They stole moments together, whenever possible, brief interludes between Josephine's teaching duties and Brody's responsibilities as deputy. Each day brought them closer, deepening the bond that had formed so quickly in the face of danger and flourished in the peace that followed. On the evening before their wedding, they stood together on the porch of their future home, Brody's arm around Josephine's shoulders as they watched the sun set over the distant mountains. "Are you nervous?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About marrying you?" "Not in the least," she replied honestly. "About the ceremony itself, perhaps a little. I've never liked being the center of attention," he chuckled. "Says the woman who stands before 28 children every day. That's different," she protested with a laugh. "Teaching is about them, not me." "Well, tomorrow is about us," he said, turning her to face him. "Just remember that when you're walking down that aisle, it's just you and me making promises we've already made in our hearts." She smiled up at him, marveling at how this man who had faced down desperate outlaws without flinching could speak words of such tender poetry. "I love you, Brody Xavier," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "And I can't wait to be your wife." "I love you, Josephine Whitfield," he murmured against her lips. "Soon to be Josephine Xavier. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" "The very best," she agreed. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their union. The small church was filled to capacity with the citizens of Silver Creek, all eager to witness the marriage of their schoolteacher and deputy sheriff, a love story that had already become something of a local legend. Josephine, dressed in a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk with lace accents, waited nervously in a side room as Mrs. Peterson made final adjustments to her veil. "You look beautiful, my dear," the older woman said, tears in her eyes. "Your parents would be so proud." "Thank you," Josephine whispered, her own eyes growing damp, "for everything. You've all made me feel so welcome here." "You're one of us now," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "You and Brody both. This town is lucky to have you." A soft knock at the door signaled it was time. Sheriff Carter, who had agreed to give Josephine away in the absence of her father, entered wearing his best suit, his badge polished to a high shine. "Ready, Miss Whitfield?" he asked with a warm smile. "There's a mighty anxious man waiting for you out there." Josephine took a deep breath, accepting the small bouquet of wildflowers that Mrs. Peterson handed her. "I'm ready." The church fell silent as the piano began to play, every head turning as Josephine appeared in the doorway on Sheriff Carter's arm. But Josephine saw only one person, Brody, standing tall and handsome at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked toward him. He wore a new suit for the occasion, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that took her breath away, a mixture of awe, pride, and such profound love that it made her heart ache with joy when Sheriff Carter placed her hand in Brody's. The connection between them was so powerful that Josephine barely heard the minister begin the ceremony. All she could focus on was the warmth of Brody's grip, the silent promise in his eyes, the slight tremble in his fingers that told her he was as moved by this moment as she was. They spoke their vows clearly, their voices carrying through the hushed church. Traditional words, but spoken with such conviction that they seemed newly minted for this moment, this union. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared at last. "You may kiss your bride." Brody's hands came up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "My wife," he whispered, for her ears alone, before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that sealed their vows more thoroughly than any words could have done. The church erupted in applause and cheers as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife for the first time. Josephine couldn't stop smiling as they walked back down the aisle together, her hand secure in the crook of Brody's arm. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and heartfelt. There was food in abundance, music for dancing, and enough well wishes to last a lifetime. Josephine found herself passed from one congratulatory embrace to another, barely having time to catch her breath before someone else wanted to express their happiness for the new couple. Through it all, Brody remained close, his hand finding hers whenever possible, his eyes seeking hers across the room when they were temporarily separated. It was as if neither could quite believe their good fortune, needing constant reassurance that this happiness was real and lasting. As evening approached, the newlyweds prepared to depart for their new home. Amidst laughter and a shower of rice, they climbed into the buggy Brody had borrowed for the occasion, waving to the assembled townspeople as they pulled away. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" Brody asked as they left the crowd behind, his arm secure around her shoulders. "Deliriously so, Mr. Xavier," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe it's real." "Better get used to it," he said, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "You're stuck with me now. For better or worse, remember." "I have a feeling it will be mostly better," she said confidently. Their home welcomed them with windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. Brody had arranged for Mrs. Peterson to come earlier and light lamps in the fireplace, ensuring the house would be cozy for their arrival. Still, Josephine gasped in surprise when Brody stopped the buggy, came around to her side, and suddenly swept her into his arms. "What are you doing?" She laughed, her arms instinctively going around his neck. "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he explained, kicking the gate open and striding up the path to their front door. "It's tradition." He managed to open the door without setting her down, then carried her inside their home. Their home. The thought made Josephine's heart swell with emotion. "Welcome home, Josephine Xavier," Brody said softly, finally setting her on her feet in the middle of their small but comfortable parlor. She looked around, taking in the simple furnishings they had acquired together over the past weeks: the sofa near the fireplace, the bookshelf already half filled with their combined collections, the braided rug that Mrs. Peterson had insisted was a necessity on cold mornings. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning back to her husband. "Everything is perfect." His arms came around her waist, drawing her close. "You're perfect," he corrected, his voice husky, "and I still can't believe you're mine." Later, much later, they lay together in the soft darkness of their bedroom, the sheets cool against heated skin. Josephine's head rested on Brody's chest, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked into the peaceful silence. She smiled against his skin. "I was thinking about that first day, the stagecoach robbery, you appearing like some avenging angel on the ridge." "Hardly an angel," he said with a soft laugh. "Just a man in the right place at the right time." "My right place, my right time," she murmured. "Do you remember what you said to me? Stay behind me until it's done." "I remember." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "I think I started falling in love with you in that moment. Not because you rescued me, but because of how you did it, without hesitation, without fear." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Not of the bandits, but of failing, of not being able to protect you and the others." "But you didn't fail," she reminded him. "You never have." "And I never will," he promised, pulling her down for a kiss that quickly rekindled the passion they had only recently satisfied. "Not when it comes to you." In the years that followed, Silver Creek continued to grow and prosper, as did the Xaviers. Josephine's school expanded to require a second teacher, though she insisted on keeping the youngest pupils under her own instruction. Brody eventually succeeded Thomas Carter as sheriff when the older man retired, bringing his unique brand of justice to the evolving territory. Their family grew as well. 2 years after their wedding, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Brody's mother. A son, James, followed 3 years later, and finally another daughter, Sarah, completing their family. Through it all, their love only deepened, tempered by the ordinary challenges of life but never diminished by them. There were difficult times, of course, illnesses, financial worries during drought years, the occasional resurgence of the violence that had marked their first meeting when outlaws passed through the region. But they faced each challenge together, just as they had faced the Slater gang all those years ago. Side by side, without fear, without hesitation. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Brody surprised Josephine by taking her back to the way station where they had spent that first night after the stagecoach robbery. The building had been expanded into a proper inn now, though Hank and Martha still ran it, greeting the Xaviers like the old friends they were. After dinner, Brody led Josephine out onto the porch where they had first truly talked, where she had first glimpsed the man behind the gunfighter's facade. "Do you remember?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they gazed up at the same stars that had witnessed their beginning. "Every moment," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. Though they were older now, silver threading through her once brown hair, lines of experience etched around his eyes, the connection between them remained as strong as ever. "I was thinking about what I said to you that first day," Brody mused. "Stay behind me until it's done." Pretty presumptuous, looking back, Josephine laughed. It was appropriate for the situation. "Maybe," he conceded with a smile, But I'm glad you didn't take it as a permanent instruction. Life's been better with you beside me, not behind me." "Partners," she agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "In everything. Always," he promised, lowering his head to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. Above them, the desert stars continued their eternal dance, witnesses to a love that had begun in danger but flourished in peace, a love as enduring as the mountains and as vast as the western sky stretching endlessly above Silver Creek.